Yeah, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is a couple of projects that we were lucky to do in Mexico. And as Monty already mentioned, I'm going to do this together with Marisa Egea, who was working as a local advisor. So she was working directly with the companies that were building these houses, some of these houses in Mexico. So there's two main topics here. First, I will just show you an overview of the program, what was all this about, and then we'll just dive into the lessons learned. Marisa will tell you a lot about the experience, first-hand experiences on site, and how she worked with the different companies and how it was to build the houses. And then I'll come back to talk a bit about implementing and the lessons learned in terms of promoting and implementing passive house in Mexico. So we are going to talk about the Kokasa program, which is led by Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal, which is basically a bank, a mortgage bank in Mexico. But we are not going to talk about the whole program. It's a very large program that is basically incentivizing the building of sustainable houses, or basically houses that reduce the greenhouse emissions. But we just participated in this case in a very small component, which is called LAIF. The name comes from the funding because it was funded by the Latin American Investment Facility from the European Union through KfW, which is the German Development Bank, which in turn gave the resources to Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal, who are the ones leading this program. And what we did, we worked together with GOPA consultants, providing technical assistance for the implementation of the program. So the whole program is basically taking or incentivizing some of the houses, but focusing on the highest energy efficiency level possible, which is basically passive house, in order to achieve up to 80% of reductions in CO2 emissions. And through the program, two things were provided. First, most of the resources were allocated to have 70% of subsidy in the additional investment costs that were related to the energy efficiency measures. And then the second one is providing technical assistance so that each project would achieve the passive house standard. This, obviously we talk only a bit about this, but this was a huge team effort, starting with the people at Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal, also GOPA, who was working directly in Mexico with them to get all the developers, the designing teams from each of the companies building the projects, and the local advisors like Marisa that were working very close with these companies so that the projects would be realized. So we were quite lucky to be able to study a lot of different typologies and projects through the entire country. So there's a variety of climate conditions that we were able to study. And from these projects, several of them then were further developed into more detailed planning so that we would then start to specify the components. And then finally, we got 30 pilots that were built in 4 different cities. I am not going to talk about all the different technical parts because I think you already know a lot about how passive house is done, but I'm just going to mention 2 projects in very different climate conditions so that you get an idea of how passive house can look. So we have on the one side a very temperate climate. This is more or less like Mexico City. And here you can have a passive house with 1 or 2 inches of insulation in the thermal envelope. We actually didn't even have to add insulation on the floor slab. And as you may have already guessed, we even can do with single glazing. We just provided a framing of better quality to be able to achieve the air tightness requirement. And because of this, because there's so little heating and cooling demand, then actually ventilation with heat recovery was not worth it. The investment was not really worth it. So we only have like an extractor system to guarantee a good air quality all times. We didn't have to install any active cooling. All we did was to put a small electric heater for the cold days that happen not very often in this climate. On the other hand, we were also able to develop the second project, which was basically on the desert. So this one we did have a bit more insulation, around 5 inches, and then 4 in the floor slab. And this project, actually, they used certified components that were imported from Spain, if I remember correctly, and we needed triple glazing. The reason for this was actually that because of the timeline of the project, at the moment when they were ready to construct, we had not been able to get the ventilation units with heat recovery for Mexico. So what we did is we changed the design so they could do with an extract air system, and then we just compensated the heat gains in this case through better components. So for cooling and heating, it was actually enough to have a small mini split unit of 1 ton, but we installed it too so that it could be distributed during the winter and the summer. So it worked both for heating and cooling. So that's basically what we did for all different projects. And now I'm going to let Marisa show you a lot more about how was it to then turn this into the actual projects in the different cities.
Hey, Elena, thank you very much. Let me just put my presentation and share you my screen. Just a second. Sorry about that. Okay. I don't know if you're looking at my screen right now, but
not quite yet.
Not quite yet. I'm sorry for that.
No problem. No problem.
Well, while it works, I'm going to tell you that each project had a local advisor. I'm just one of them, but we worked really close together. So I got to know the experience on all the projects, and that's what I am going to talk to you about. But this is not working. I think the internet is not working properly right now. And can you see it? So maybe Elena, if you can help me just looking through the slides. And I know this was not planned, but
no, that works great. That's a good, yeah.
Okay, I think you see it now. Then you just let me know when you need me to change them.
Yes. Yes. Well, as Elena was telling you about, the concept of the program involved the optimization of typologies that were previously developed. So we didn't have the chance to work with compactness or orientation, but we had the chance to optimize an existing project. So as you can see, we were very limited to the possibility of influencing the shape, as I said, compactness or orientation. And we just focused on optimizing or bringing up solutions to avoid thermal bridges and increase the performance of the envelope and get better conditions that you already know. So Elena, can you help me next, please? Thank you. And we had a very long process of planning, which was really interesting. We had to make all these details together with the companies, and there was really fun to witness that once they had the details. When they came on site, we had all these challenges that we were not expecting. such as getting familiar with continuous insulation. As you can see, we have the detail with the insulation behind the floor slab. But when the construction workers were doing it and placing the insulation, they were realizing that they need to put a ring around to keep all the insulation together and not to have movements while they cast the concrete. So they figured out how to solve everything down there. And you can see in the pictures that the one underneath that you can have this ring of concrete surrounding the floor slab. And then you could keep everything together, stick together, and then put the houses, build the house on top, and assure that you avoid every thermal breach. Next, please. And again, we were trying to get rid of the thermal bridges. So during the planning, we did all the details and stuff. But in the construction, of course, we got into some gaps between the insulation panels and, of course, the penetration of all the electricity and plumbing and ventilation, and we had to solve it like inside with the materials we could afford at that moment. Next, please. And of course, we had to welcome high performance windows and doors. People at the construction workers, they didn't know these windows with this thickness, so they were really amused about the proportions of it. And we had to work, of course, with the management and the all the challenges that involve keeping the oldest windows in a safe position, and working with them properly to be installed as they should be, and getting familiar with these new products for them. Next, please. And this involved, again, the right place installing the windows, because of course we knew that they be installed in terms of air tightness. I mean, we were working on that before the planning stage, but once they arrived, we didn't realize that the opening of the windows was going to be a problem. So we were trying to figure out new ways to solve those issues on site. Next, please. And as Elena said, we were not having special ventilation systems. We were only working on extract air systems, very basic, but still it's not really common to have extract systems in inlets in bedrooms or living rooms, not in this climate. So we were working with the team to explain how it would work, and doing the tests, and just having fun with the process of planning it and developing it. Next, please. And of course, the big issue was air tightness. It's a new concept for us in Mexico. We don't work with air tightness at all. And we had different approaches to it. We had these webinars directed by the manufacturers. We held this documentation going on and forth, and we had to work with the teams on site with all this paper and documents and instructions on how to place the tapes. And then we got into this tiny details where we didn't know what to do with these gaps. The tape wasn't placed as we were expecting. So we had to get back to the manufacturer to ask his advice. And it was such a challenging effort. And on the other project, people on site covered all the window with the panels, and they had to cut it to cut the surrounding, to take it off, because that was the place where the tapes were going to be. So we asked for the window producer to lend us some of the samples with the tapes, so the people can be familiar on what the window would be with the tapes on. And that's why we had all these samples, and finally the windows were placed correctly. And next, please. It happened that of course, all the installations were also a big issue, because we had in Mexico to, of course, buy samples of the electrical system and then send it to Germany, to the manufacturer of the tapes, and show them what our issue was going to be. And they manufactured by hand these shapes that allowed us to prepare the material. So he sent back to Mexico some of the samples, and then the construction would know how to work with the tapes for the electric system, plumbing, and water and ventilation system. And after that, it got the final moment, and we were having fun finally with the blower door test. It was really exciting to see how the house that was that was planned, like with very detailed, passed the test like really easily. We didn't have to do anything with that house. But it was fun to see like the tiny little gaps and how it worked. And it was amazing for everyone in the construction site to perform that. I mean, to be present at the performance of that test. Next, please.
I just interrupt you. My favorite part of the blower door test was the technique used to seal all the different pipes with actual party balloons. So it was actually great and a lot of fun to be there to see how they interpreted the requirements.
Yes, I agree. Next, please. And as I said, the training and the teams and the active role of the design team and local advisors and the manufacturers, of course, gave results. You can see like the results on the right of one of the houses, and it was pretty amazing. We didn't have to do anything at all with that house after that blower door test. It was supposed to be like the preliminary, but it worked perfectly. Next, please. And I would say that the lessons learned through all the project is that, of course, you need intensive communication between all parties involved. And this happened at this project with all the stakeholders behind the working site, I mean, the construction site, and of course, at the construction site. So it was information going on back and forward all the time, and it was really intense, and it paid off. And as this picture shows, some of the companies were really smart because they built a pilot unit first. They were going to build 10 houses, but instead of building them in a road, I mean, at the same time, they decided to go like building a pair of houses first, and apply the lessons learned to the second pair and then to the third pair. So it was really great because the last pair of houses was built like really fast with no obstacles in the way. And of course, it all ended in upward learning at all scales. For everyone involved, it was a great experience. So Elena, I get back to you. Thanks for helping me with the slides.
No worries. Yeah, So, as you may have already guessed, and probably I'm not going to tell you anything new, one of the key things here was the components. So one of the things we had to work a lot on, and which I think is, I hope it's more, it's valuable not only just for this project, but also in the future, is that we're able to set up a chain so that the components that are not yet available in Mexico are now, or are not yet produced in Mexico, are now available. And so the different manufacturers that were interested in working together with us then were also able to form a relationship with local companies that were either working as distributors, or in the case of ventilation systems, also part of the teams that would help them with the design of the whole ventilation system for the houses, and then would also be able to provide post-sale services. And this is definitely a factor that that has to be taken into account for these projects that are relatively uncommon, because importing is, I mean, still it brings a lot of complications to the whole construction process in terms of schedules and many other things. So I don't know if you ever talk to any of my colleagues. This is why we also insist a lot on local components and having components manufactured in the places where the houses are built, because this not only allows for better prices, but also it makes the whole process much, much easier. So I'm not going to dive into the cost of the project, but what I want to show you in this graph are three things. So for each of the projects, you see two graphs. The first one with BAU is basically business as usual, and the second one is the passive house. Green is for electricity costs. Blue are the costs in terms of gas, because in Mexico we use gas for cooking and heating water. And red are the additional investment costs. So you see three projects, the first two and then the very last one, which we overall have very low costs. Those are the projects that are located in very, very mild climates. So the milder the climate, the easier it is to achieve passive house. And then the ones in the middle are much, much higher. Those are the climates with more requirements, the very, very hot climates, and especially very hot and humid climates, you then would need significant investments at the beginning. So obviously for the projects where the climates are very mild, even so the initial investment costs are lower, but also the potential of savings are lower. So in those cases, it was actually harder to achieve what we consider cost efficiency through passive house. But we also have to consider or not forget that in these cases, we are not seeing the benefit of other advantages of passive house, like improved comfort or much better air quality through the ventilation systems. And then the other one is, even though we would have expected that in the very hot climates, we would also have a lot of savings, in some cases, it was not, the passive house was not the best option. And then we were not able to dive that much into that, but our assumption is that these were the case when, for several reasons, the components that were chosen for those specific projects had prices that were above the market average. So then that would increase the investment cost no matter what you did with the passive house. And then one thing that we still need to consider is, even if the project would show throughout the whole life cycle that the passive house is it's definitely a better option in terms of the savings, this is still social housing. So this does not necessarily mean that it's yet affordable for the user, and this is where the part for the role of the banks and financing and incentive comes into place, because we need to also make sure that the families that are buying this house are able to pay the loan, because most of the houses in Mexico are bought through loans. So this is something that needs to be considered, not only for this project, but for any other projects that would want to incentivize more energy efficient homes. And an element that definitely comes into place is the teams that you're working with, and how, if they are already familiar or are working in companies that foster innovation, then these teams would have an easier, or it will be easier for these teams to actually get into this process of much more detailed planning that we require for a passive house, because this is so in Mexico, social housing is just, they already have the prototypes. They don't have to do anything with them. They just put them into like a site, and then they're ready to construct them, and to construct them in hundreds and thousands. So there is no planning process, and we were asking of them to go back into the design, and then not only redesign the house or the prototype, but also to look into the details and see how that would work, because that was actually very important, as Marisa showed, to be able to, at the end, achieve what we wanted for passive house. So my last slide it's called conclusion, but it's mostly food for thought. I think through these projects, we were able to show that passive house is technically possible in Mexico. And I mean, as you already heard, these are not the first passive houses in Mexico. Marisa worked on the first house in Mexico, but we have to also keep in mind that it requires more resources, not only in terms of the technologies, but also in the time that the teams would need for additional planning and to be able to construct these houses. So teams and how they are involved in the projects are key, and communicating throughout the whole, so from the beginning of the planning until the house is ready, is really, really, really important. And another thing that Marisa and I started to discuss is we, I guess, as passive house people, see the benefits of these houses, not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of how they improve the quality of life of people. But we wonder if many of the challenges that we have is whether we are able to communicate these benefits to the people that would ultimately buy these houses, and how much can we still contribute to market awareness, so that this is not only done through projects that have some subsidies, but that become part of the norm in Mexico, and not only in Mexico, but in other countries. So there's tons of information about this project. I can send through the links and the different things that we have published in this regard. And I just would like to thank you all for allowing us to present this. And I'm looking forward to all the questions you have.